Let me ask you something honest. If your employer stopped paying you tomorrow, right now, today, how many days could you survive without touching a loan, a credit card, or asking someone for money? Think about that for a second. Not weeks, not months, days. For most people in the United States and across Europe, the honest answer is somewhere between 7 and 30. Some people can't even reach 7, and these aren't people living in poverty. These are people with jobs, with salaries, with cars in the driveway, and subscriptions they've forgotten they're paying for. This video isn't about becoming rich. It's about something far more fundamental, a specific number, $10,000, and what happens to your brain, your decisions, and your entire life when you actually have it sitting in the bank. Not invested, not tied up, just sitting there. Because here's what nobody tells you. That number doesn't just change your finances, it changes who you are. Let's talk about someone real. We'll call him Daniel. Daniel is 29 years old. He lives in Chicago. He's got a bachelor's degree, took out $34,000 in student loans to get it, and he's been working at a mid-size marketing firm for about 3 years. His salary is $62,000 a year. On paper, that sounds decent, but let's look at what Daniel actually takes home after taxes. After federal income tax, state tax, Social Security, and Medicare, Daniel's net monthly take-home is approximately $3,900. Now let's walk through his month. His apartment in a mid-tier Chicago neighborhood runs him $1,480 a month. That's considered moderate for his area, not the trendy part of town, just functional. He drives a used Honda he financed 2 years ago. That's $310 a month. Insurance on the car adds another $130. Student loan payments, $340 a month on the standard repayment plan. Groceries, utilities, phone, internet, he keeps that around $620 combined if he's careful. And then there's the rest of life. A gym membership he uses 3 times a week, that's $45. Streaming services, a few apps, maybe a dinner out twice a month. He's not living extravagantly. He gets a coffee sometimes. He visited his parents last Thanksgiving and bought a last-minute flight. When you add it up, Daniel spends, on average, $3,760 a month. He earns $3,900. That leaves $140. $140 of breathing room per month. And some months, when the car needs an oil change, or a friend gets married, or his laptop starts slowing down, he spends more than he earns. And that's when the credit card fills the gap. Not because Daniel is irresponsible, because the math simply doesn't leave room. Now, here's the version of Daniel in Berlin, or Manchester, or Lyon. The names of the expenses change. The rent might be lower in some cities, but healthcare co-pays or transportation costs shift the numbers around. The student debt might be smaller, but the salary is also smaller. The formula looks different on the surface, but the outcome is almost identical. A person with a real income, working hard, living reasonably, and sitting on the financial edge every single month. This isn't a crisis story. This is just Tuesday for millions of people. Here's the part nobody really wants to talk about because it doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like life. Daniel isn't doing anything obviously wrong. He's not gambling, he's not buying luxury items, he's not making reckless decisions, but he is participating in a system that was designed, very carefully designed, to keep him exactly where he is. Think about how his life is structured. His biggest expenses, rent, car payment, student loan, are all fixed, recurring, and they came before he had any real financial foundation. He signed that apartment lease when he first moved to Chicago and needed a place quickly. He bought the car because public transit in his part of the city is limited and unreliable. He took the student loan at 18 because that's what you did. None of these were bad decisions in isolation, but combined they created a structure where every dollar Daniel earns has already been spoken for before it arrives. Economists call this committed expenditure. Behavioralists call it a financial trap. The credit card industry just calls it their business model. because here's the math that actually matters. Daniel carries an average credit balance of $2,200. His card charges 22% annual interest. That's roughly $484 in interest per year, or $40 a month, that Daniel pays just to maintain access to money he technically doesn't have. Now, $40 a month doesn't sound catastrophic, but let's think about what $40 a month invested instead at a modest 7% annual return becomes over 20 years. $40 a month for 20 years at 7% equals approximately $26,000. Daniel isn't just paying $40 a month. He's paying $40 a month to not have $26,000 in 20 years. And this is before we factor in the single biggest invisible cost of being in this situation: the decisions Daniel doesn't make. He doesn't negotiate his salary as aggressively as he could because he can't afford to leave if they say no. He stays in a job that's plateaued because the stability feels safer than a gap in income. He doesn't start that freelance project because the startup costs feel risky with nothing in reserve. Every single one of those non-decisions has a financial value. And when you're operating with $140 of breathing room per month, you are constantly, quietly making those non-decisions.
There's a concept in psychology called cognitive load. It refers to the amount of mental processing your brain is doing at any given moment. When you're carrying a heavy cognitive load, when your mind is managing a lot of complex, unresolved problems, your capacity to think clearly, plan, and make good long-term decisions shrinks. Financial stress is one of the most reliable ways to increase cognitive load. Researchers at Princeton and Harvard published a study on this, and the findings were stark. They found that financial scarcity, the constant background awareness of not having enough, consumes cognitive bandwidth the equivalent of a 13-point drop in IQ. That's not a metaphor. That's a measurable impairment in your ability to think. This is why people in financial stress make decisions that, from the outside, look short-sighted. Not because they lack intelligence, because their intelligence is being partially occupied by a constant low-grade financial alarm that never fully turns off. And this is where $10,000 comes in, and why that specific number matters. $10,000 is generally enough to cover 3 to 4 months of basic expenses for most middle-class earners in the U.S. and comparable earners in Western Europe. It's not a fortune, it's not retirement, but it represents something psychologically profound, the point at which your brain stops being in survival mode. When that money is sitting in the bank, something quiet and significant shifts. You stop making decisions from fear. You start making decisions from choice. You negotiate the raise because you can afford a month without a paycheck if they react badly. You leave the job that's going nowhere because you have a runway. You take the client project on the side because the startup costs don't terrify you anymore. None of these are dramatic. None of them require courage in the heroic sense. They just require the absence of desperation. And $10,000 is, for most people, the number that creates that absence. There's a reason why financial advisors across the US, the UK, Germany, and France all seem to arrive at the same foundational advice. Before you invest a single dollar, build an emergency fund. It's not because they're being conservative, it's because they know that without that foundation, every other financial decision you make will be slightly warped by fear. Let's run 2 versions of Daniel's life side by side over 10 years. Version 1, Daniel keeps doing what he's doing. He earns modest raises, let's say 3% a year, roughly in line with inflation. He keeps his spending tight, but never quite breaks through. His savings hover between $200 and $800 at any given time. He doesn't take big financial risks, but he also doesn't build anything. By 39, he's a decade deeper into the same structure. Version 2, Daniel makes one significant change at 29. He picks up a freelance project or gets a roommate for 1 year or aggressively cuts one major expense, and he builds $10,000 in savings over 18 months. It's uncomfortable, it requires real sacrifice, but once he has it, something shifts. He negotiates a 12% raise because he walks into that conversation without desperation. He pays off his credit card balance in full, saving $484 in interest a year. He starts putting $300 a month into a low-cost index fund, something he couldn't psychologically commit to before because the money felt needed as a buffer. $300 a month for 10 years at 7% annual return equals approximately $52,000. By 39, Daniel in version 2 doesn't just have more money, he has a fundamentally different relationship with money. His decisions are no longer reactive. He's not managing emergencies, he's making choices. The difference between these two lives isn't talent or luck or even income. It's one number, $10,000, and the clarity that comes with it. This plays out identically in Amsterdam, Edinburgh, Lyon, and Toronto. The currency changes, the exact numbers shift, but the psychological architecture is the same. A buffer creates agency, and agency creates options, and options, compounded over time, create a completely different life.
People who are genuinely good with money, not rich by inheritance, not lucky with crypto, but quietly, consistently financially stable, tend to think about it differently than most. They don't think about money as a reward. They think about it as a tool. And like any tool, its usefulness depends entirely on whether you have it when you actually need it. They prioritize liquidity before growth. That means before they invest in anything, they make sure they have accessible cash that requires no selling, no waiting, no penalty. Not because they're afraid of investing, but because they understand that an investment you're forced to sell at the wrong moment because you needed the cash is worse than not investing at all. They also think carefully about the cost of constraints. Every financial commitment they take on, a lease, a loan, a subscription, they evaluate not just by its monthly cost, but by how much flexibility it removes. A person with $10,000 in savings and a flexible month-to-month rental agreement has more real-world options than someone with the same income locked into a 2-year lease and a car payment, even if their monthly spending looks similar on paper. And they treat the emergency fund not as a sacrifice, but as a purchase. They are buying something very specific, the ability to make decisions without fear. That's not a small thing. For most people, that's the most valuable purchase they will ever make. They also understand compounding, not just in the mathematical sense, but in the behavioral sense. Good decisions lead to better options, which lead to better decisions. Fear-based decisions close doors. Security-based decisions open them. And over a decade, the difference in where those two paths lead is enormous. Finally, they are slow, not passive. Slow. They don't react to every financial trend, every new investment strategy, every colleague who made money doing something. They identify their 1 or 2 next right moves, and they execute them steadily. The goal isn't excitement. The goal is progress that doesn't collapse when something unexpected happens. So let's come back to where we started. If your income stopped tomorrow, how many days could you last? If the honest answer is uncomfortable, that's not a reason to feel guilty. The system most of us live in is genuinely designed to absorb every dollar we earn before we have a chance to keep any of it. That's not a conspiracy. It's just how the structure of modern expenses, consumer finance, and lifestyle pressure works. But understanding that structure is the first step to building something outside of it. $10,000 in the bank won't make you wealthy. It won't solve every problem. It won't feel as satisfying as a vacation or a new car or the latest version of a phone you already have. But it will do something more important than any of those things. It will change how you think.
And that change, quiet, invisible, and deeply real, is worth more than almost anything else you could buy with that money. That's what this video is really about. Not the number, the clarity that comes with it. Build that first. Everything else gets easier after that. If this gave you a new way to think about money, not just new information, but an actual shift in perspective, consider subscribing. That's what this channel is about, understanding money the way it actually works, not the way it's usually sold to us.